add something to this, little bit like that. Someone will come and add something to this, like this, like this, like this. So एक knowledge का base है, उससे उसको expand करना. So this is the whole craft of knowledge building, knowledge production. ठीक है? So philosophical tradition मतलब when we are studying symbolic interactionism, क्या क्या थे इससे पहले क्या क्या थे, how it got expanded. Okay, that's what we're going to see. So there are 2 points, 2 important foundations for the rise of symbolic interactionism. The first is the philosophy of pragmatism. The philosophy of pragmatism. And the second is psychological behaviorism. So these were the theories which were being debated by the founders, the propounders of what? SI, symbolic interactionism. Okay. Now let's see what is pragmatism. Pragmatism क्या है? This is it's a philosophical position defined as an approach to things that focuses on the practical or logical responses. So इसका I have noted down some points. I'll tell you. So pragmatism क्या होता है? First of all, let me say that pragmatism is something that helped George Herbert Mead in the formation of his theory, symbolic interactionism. Okay, this was one of the basic philosophical, thought. Now, what are the things in pragmatism that we must know? The first is reality does not exist out there. Society है, एक environment है उसमें. If you have make sense of something, a reality, वो ऐसा like it is not there. It is not just out there in the society. Okay, rather what? It is actively created as per our actions in the world. So you see, this is where it gets started. Reality does not exist out there, but you create reality out of your actions. So if something is happening out there, it has a relationship bearing on the subject. Okay, so that correlationship, the communication or the action-reaction responses is what we're going to discuss in symbolic interactionism. The second point of pragmatism is our knowledge of the world depends on what has been proven useful to us. A knowledge of the world, suppose say we have a long history of what? Scientific revolution. तो एक टाइम पे से 14th century में people were using spinning mill, right? And ultimately something got invented called power loom. तो spinning mill क्या होता है? जो handloom, it is of no use, so people discard it. So knowledge production process में भी क्या होता है? Something that is proven useful to us will be used, something which is not useful will be discarded. Okay. So our knowledge of the world depends on what is important to us. What is not important are discarded. As per what? The pragmatist. Okay. The third point is people define the social and the physical objects of the world as per their usability. So very much related to the second point, and we always see as per the usability मतलब एक होता ना I've forgotten this particular word which is there in word power or something, that there's a red color box. What in it for me or what in it for us, ऐसा एक एटीट्यूड होता है ना, एक इंटेंशन. इसमें मेरे लिए क्या होता है? Something that is of use to me, something profitable to me, right? If it is not profitable or if it is not useful to me, discard it like that. So our knowledge of the world depends upon the usability of things. Okay. Now the last point of pragmatism is to understand actors, we must understand what they do in the world. So the world out there in front of us will have different actors, many actors. Okay. So out of this many actors, how we have to conceive of this world is to understand what they do in the world. Okay, so these are the four main things that you have to know about pragmatism, philosophical tradition. Okay, we're talking about the philosophical tradition. We'll come further. We'll discuss about Bloomer. But before that, what are the things that are very important? Something which is said by Bloomer as well as symbolic interactionism in particularly by Bloomer and also by the symbolic interactionism theories. The first point is to focus on the interaction between the actors and the world based on the meaning ascribed to those things in the world. Okay, to focus on the interaction between the actors in the world. So एक actor है, this is the subject. Okay, यहाँ this is the world. यहाँ there are different actors. To focus on the relationship between these two. Okay, I'll make some diagrams here. आगे जाके बहुत सारे diagrams है, उसमें से 2 diagrams मैं बना दूँ. Something related to this what I am saying right now. Okay, the relationship between the actor or the actors and the subject. This is what we have to focus. Second is the relationship between the actors and the world is a very dynamic process and not a static process. Dynamic process, something that is mobile, moving, something like that, changeable, not static. Okay, and the ascribed meanings come from the interaction with others in the society. The interaction with others in the society. So these are all others. Okay, the actors. Yes, this is the individual. So whenever we talk about symbolic interactionism or psychology, क्या होता है इसमें social psychology में एक individual होता है, individual versus the others, individual versus the world, the society, like that. So the relationship between basic theory of sociology. What is sociology? The complex relationship between different nodes, different points in the society, right? तो इसमें क्या होता है? The complex relationship between different nodes with what? The individual. ये actors है. The बहुत सारे relationships इसमें the web of relationships with what? The individual. So इसके अंदर जो भी यहाँ एक impulse होगा, यहाँ से response होगा, that we'll discuss here. Okay, relationship, symbolic. Now the third point, emphasis is given to the actor's ability to interpret the world. So this is the basic point, main point. Okay, the third point, the ability of the subject to interpret the world. Here comes the most important part, that is subjectivity. Our idea of the world through our interpretation. हमारा एक self होगा ना, इससे हम एक cognition होगा. If an impulse is coming to me, I'll have a sense of what is coming towards me, right? There will be some level of interpretation, subjective interpretation going inside my mind to give a response to the impulse, right? So that interpretation is, subjective interpretation is very much required. The third point. Okay. So that will help in making sense of things out there. Okay. Now, so these are the 3 main points. Now, John Dewey, coughing a lot. John Dewey, one of the founders of Chicago School, who was a pragmatist. Pragmatism की मैंने अभी बारे में बताया था ना, 4 points. So he's one person. I just want to quote something. Tell you something about him here. He said he had banked upon the third point, that is the interpretation part, when he defined a mind as a process with different stages, and he said that it is not a structured thing. A mind is not a structured thing. John Dewey. Okay. So basically what we are going to do here is the thinking process forms the base of the symbolic interactionism. Mind, thinking. तो third level में बताया था एक subjective interpretation, right? So that will come to the thinking point. So here the thinking process forms the basis of symbolic interactionism. Now pragmatism का 2 पार्ट्स है, टू मेन डिविजन्स ऑफ प्रैग्मेटिज्म। एक क्या होता है, फिलोसॉफिकल रियलिज्म, दूसरा है नॉमिनलिस्ट प्रैग्मेटिज्म। तो फिलोसॉफिकल रियलिज्म, विल जस्ट गो थ्रू वेरी स्विफ्टली, ओके। फिलोसॉफिकल रियलिज्म एंड नॉमिनलिस्ट प्रैग्मेटिज्म। बहुत ये मैकेनिकल टाइप लगेगा क्योंकि बहुत सारे टर्म्स है। लेट्स मेक इट ईजी बिकॉज ये जस्ट फिलोसॉफिकल, वी हैव नॉट कम टू द मेन पार्ट, ओके। सिम्बॉलिक इंट्रैक्शनिज्म में नहीं आया अभी। दिस इज द द हिस्ट्री ऑफ द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ सिम्बॉलिक इंट्रैक्शनिज्म। सो प्रैग्मेटिज्म डेवलपमेंट में बता रहा हूँ, ट्राई टू लिंक, ओके, बिटवीन द डिफरेंट हिस्ट्री ऑफ द डेवलपमेंट ऑफ सिम्बॉलिक इंट्रैक्शनिज्म। मैंने बताया एक फिलोसॉफिकल हिस्ट्री है, तो उसमें एक प्रैग्मेटिज्म क्या होता है, इसे प्रैग्मेटिज्म से डिबेट्स आएगा, साइकोलॉजिज्म वर्सेस सोशियोलॉजिज्म, रिडक्शनिज्म वर्सेस सोशियोलॉजिज्म, लाइक दैट। सो in that debates एक होता है ना, in the development of some theories or any knowledge foundation you'll find lacuna, कहाँ पे loop holes है। so wherever there is loop holes, उसी जगह पे people will come with their thoughts and fit in there to develop something. So that's how this debates and discussion prior to the formation of some theory is very much required. That is why philosophy, even when you write about symbolic interactionism, you have to go back in history and find out what were the philosophical traditions of this particular, not just about this SI, for anything, any theory, go back and see what was the precursor of this theory, the philosophical tradition. What were the debates and discussion that went into the making of this particular theory? ठीक है, एक दो पॉइंट्स एटलीस्ट, तो वही हम कर रहे हैं यहाँ पर, प्रैग्मेटिज्म, बिहेवियरिज्म, ठीक है। नाउ हु आर द नॉमिनलिस्ट प्रैग्मेटिस्ट, और ये होता क्या है? सो हियर द कम्युनिटी हैज़ नो बियरिंग ऑन द इंडिविजुअल. द नॉमिनलिस्ट pragmatists would say the community has no bearing on the individual. That means individuals are free agents who can accept, who can reject or modify the norms of the community as per their own wishes, conveniences and plans. मतलब देखो, don't be very mechanical type का मत सोचना. Very simple. Individuals are free agents. As per the pragmatists, what they say is, I as an individual, I'm a free agent and I can, जो भी responses, stimulus आता है मेरे तरफ, like if I'm standing here, अभी stimulus क्या आ रहा है? Your gestures. If you're smiling, that is a gesture to me. If you're laughing, that is a gesture to me. If you're listening keenly with some facial expression, that is a gesture to me. Okay, so I as a subject will have certain senses in me, certain ability in me as a free agent to accept, to reject, to modify the norms of the community. Say like the whatever responses, whatever stimulus coming from the community, from the world out there. Okay, so that is what the pragmatists say. Individuals are free agents. They have the ability to modify, to reject, to give response to the stimulus. Now, Mead, in this discussion, who was Mead? Mead क्या सोचते थे pragmatism के बारे में, and who was he? Mead was a philosophical realist. एक भाई यहाँ बताया था ना मैंने, क्या है, एक philosophical realism versus nominalist pragmatism. तो Mead was a philosophical realist, and what they do? Mead philosophical realist क्या करते थे, क्या सोचते थे? Vis-a-vis what? The nominalist pragmatist. So Mead as a philosophical realist said individuals are not free agents. Pragmatists क्या बोलते हैं? Individuals are free agents. They can modify, they can object, they can reject. But Mead said individuals are not free agents, but their cognition and their behaviors are controlled by their community. This is where the society is important. Community चाहिए हमें. मैं अपने तरफ से कुछ भी ऐसे modify और control नहीं कर सकता. Community is there. That is why Mead के theory में क्या होता है? He gives preference to the society. a mind is developed because of society. Society पहला होना चाहिए, उसके बाद self बाद में आएगा. ठीक है? So in this whole process he gave preference to society. ठीक है? So he said no, individuals are not free agents, but then there is society. Okay, so there are some points. Let me tell you what he said. Mead's mode of engagement was more bent towards psychological behaviorism, which led him to the realist and empiricist direction. Psychological behaviorism, ये क्या होता है? We'll talk about it. Okay, now so he call his approach, उनके approach जो सोसाइटी को प्रेफरेंस देता है, उसको क्या बताते थे मीड? ही कॉल इट सोशल बिहेवियरिज्म. ओके, ही कॉल इट सोशल बिहेवियरिज्म एज अपोज टू देयर इज अनदर वन, रेडिकल बिहेवियरिज्म. सो मीड का होता है सोशल बिहेवियरिज्म एज अपोज टू रेडिकल बिहेवियरिज्म. सो व्हाट डू रेडिकल बिहेवियरिस्ट थिंक? व्हाट इज देयर थॉट? व्हाट इज देयर ओपिनियन? And who propounded it? So radical behaviorism was propounded by someone called John B. Watson. Okay, John B. Watson. Now you see the basic difference between these two, between radical behaviorist and the social behaviorist propounded by whom? Mead. Okay, so the basic difference between these two is that radical क्या हो गया? Radical behaviorists were concerned with the observable, that is overt, the observable behaviors of individuals, whereas Mead was concerned with the covert, something that is not observable, something that you can see. तो ये radical behaviorist का overt behaviors उसमें emphasis देते थे, and Mead, who was a social behaviorist, he thought and he propounded that no, it's not just the overt thing, but then covert, something which is hidden, that is also required. So example of Mead's concern, the combination of the stimulus and response in an act. इसमें क्या होता है? Let's see. That is a combination of an action plus the mental processes involved in the act. For example, let me tell you. Okay, एक डायरेक्टर है, फिल्म के सेटिंग है, let's say. Okay, so maybe in a stage, यहाँ पे एक स्टेज है, there are some actors here. Okay, so एक एक्टर, मेन लीड एक्टर, यहाँ डायरेक्टर बैठा है. डायरेक्टर ने इसको पूरी तरीक़ा से ridicule. Suppose you ridicule him. This actor A, in front of all the other actors, उनको क्या feel होगा? बुरी तरीक़ा से, being taunted or something like that. The director. See, इसमें क्या होता है? The actor A, to hide his feeling, he may smile. To overcome the impact, he may smile in front of the others. As per Mead, क्या होता है? The act of smiling, what goes behind this act of smiling, उनके अंदर दिमाग में क्या चल रहा है? एक radical behaviorist क्या कहते हैं? Something that is observable. Observable चीज़ क्या उसमें? The only act of smiling. But Mead say no, it's not enough. It's not just the act of smiling. What goes behind this act of smiling? He's hiding something. Mental processes. That's what Mead is saying. Okay, the mental processes. He's hiding something. So that is not the overt, but the covert thing, the hidden thing, the hidden behavioral characters, or you can say, the hidden behaviors of the actors. So Mead is not just interested in the act of the smile, but also covert emotions and the thought processes of the smile, the actor's subjective experience. किसी ने मेरे को ऐसे बुरी तरह से डांट दिया, तो मेरा एक subjective experience होगा ना, vis-a-vis the stimulus. The stimulus coming from what? Somebody, an object in front of me. So, I'm being impacted. I have some subjective response to the stimulus. That subjective response, which is mental in nature, which goes inside someone's mind, something which cannot be seen, not observable, that is where he is interested. Okay. Now, so this is the basic difference between radical behaviorist and what? Social behaviorist. The one founded by, the one which was given by Watson, and the one given by Mead. Now let's come to the basic categories. क्या categories है? The debate between behaviorism or psychologism and sociologism. ठीक है? So this will be the last one in the philosophical discussion. So reductionism क्या है? Psychologism क्या है? And what is sociologism? Reductionism or psychologism versus sociologism. Let's see. Okay. So Bloomer, he had tried to differentiate between this, symbolic interactionism and psychologism or reductionism. He tried. Okay. And however, Herbert Bloomer saw that symbolic interactionism was, entangled into, two problems. और ये problems क्या है? Reductionist behaviorism and structure functionalism. तो Bloomer ने क्या किया था? He tried to differentiate between psychologism and symbolic interactionism first of all, and in this he found out that symbolic interactionism has two basic problems. और ये basic problem क्या होता है? Integral into basic problems, that is reductionist behaviorism and structure functionalism. क्यों ये reductionist behaviorism और structure functionalism दोनों symbolic interactionism में कैसे problem होते थे? How it was a problem to this? Let's see. Okay, so he contended that both these two things, that is what is that? Reductionist behaviorism and structure functionalism. Both these two things, they were dependent upon the external factors or stimuli, like the external factors like stimuli coming from outside and norms to cause human behaviorism. But he said that both theories ignored the important factors by which actors allow external forces or stimuli to have a bearing on the individual's behavior. इसका मतलब देखो, यहाँ एक ऑब्जेक्ट है, ऑब्जेक्ट से अगर स्टिमुलस आता है यहाँ, दिस इज द सब्जेक्ट, दिस इज एन इंडिविजुअल, ठीक है, कुछ स्टिमुलस आ रहा है, तो रिडक्शनिज्म में क्या होता है? दे वर ऑलवेज डिपेंडेंट अपॉन to look at the social experience, to look at the experience of this subject and object relationship. The reductionist would always be dependent upon what? Only the external stimulus coming from outside, जो Herbert Bloomer और Mead accept नहीं करते थे. ठीक है, it's not just the external stimulus coming from outside which should be taken into consideration. This is what they said. Reductionists were saying only outside. Okay, but they, and what they did, the radical reductionists, what they did was, they ignored the important factors by which the actors allow external forces or stimuli to have a bearing on individuals' behavior. इसकी वजह से जो स्टिमुलस आ रहे हैं, इसकी वजह से एक इस सब्जेक्ट का इंडिविजुअल के बिहेवियर में जो बेयरिंग्स होता है, समथिंग that impacts the individual behavior of the subject, this is being negated in what? Reductionist behaviorism. ठीक है? So that is why something you have to go down the level in nuances to understand the impact being impacted by the stimulus coming from outside. ठीक है? So this is where they have a different view between the reductionist or psychologism and the symbolic interactionists, who are basically involved in sociologism. Now let's see. Bloomer emphasized on how self can emerge from an interactive process of joining action. See, this is where you have to understand. I'll tell you. एक यहाँ एक ऑब्जेक्ट है. The object is giving a stimulus to the subject here. Okay, ये subject है. This is an subject मतलब always an individual. एक stimulus आया. Suppose एक gesture है or just throwing something, a chalk. You have a response, right? एक response होगा. So this is the subject. तो इसमें क्या कहता है देखो, self can emerge from the interactive process of joining an action. So मेरा ये जो self है, what is self? Self क्या होता है? Absolute me. अगर मैं एक personality हूँ, तो the totality of being myself, my consciousness, unconscious, my physical, my mental process, whatever disposition that I have in front of others in the world is self. ठीक है, myself. So he says, Bloomer says that he emphasizes on self can emerge from the interactive process of joining action. So एक stimulus आया, you're not self until and unless what? Joining action मतलब until and unless you respond. There will be an action as a response to the stimulus. So in that process something is going on inside. Cognition, response मतलब some thinking process is going behind your mind, right? That's how it gets into the development of yourself. You will understand yourself. I myself. ठीक है, एक ऑब्जेक्ट की तरह समझना शुरू होगा. It will come in a theory. The last part meets theory. Mind, self, society. उसमें आएगा. ठीक है. First of all, basic point ये समझ लो. Self emerge होता है कहाँ से? When you begin to act and join the action of. When you begin giving response to the action of. मैं क्या कह रहा हूँ? Self emerge when you कहाँ है? Where is my note? Where is it? Herbert Bloomer. Okay. Self can emerge from the interactive process of joining action. When you start being part of an action, that is where self will emerge in you. Okay, he says human beings are constantly, very important term you have to write down. Okay, human beings are constantly engaged in a mindful action, quote unquote mindful action that constructs and negotiates the meaning of situations. So this is a situation. Say there's some stimulus is coming from outside, from an object, and then he tends to interpret it, subjective interpretation, and then there will be a response in the form of an action. So when you start joining the action, that is where you develop the sense of self. This is what he says. So he says that there is a constant engagement, a mindful action in human beings that constructs and negotiates the meaning of different situations. कोई भी situations में there is something mindful. So a teacher is teaching you and you're listening. There is some mindful action going on in your mind, in your disposition, in your responses that helps you in negotiating the situation, any situation. That is what Bloomer says. Okay, so Bloomer was against psychological reductionism of any type. कोई भी psychological reductionism of any type. Reductionism जो पहले मैंने बताया था starting में, it is not just the external factor that helps in understanding the social experience in the world. It's also what is going on in your mind, your responses, right? So he is against all forms of reductionism and where in reductionism क्या होता है? They ignore the process by which actors construct meanings. So actor एक single entity नहीं होता है. There is actor is always in society, right? This is not an isolated entity. That means you have to for this actor to construct meanings, एक सिचुएशन में एक मीनिंग कंस्ट्रक्शन प्रोसेस होता है, समथिंग दैट गोज ऑन इनसाइड योर माइंड, यू नो स्टिमुलस रिस्पॉन्स का एक वो कॉम्प्लेक्स होता है, वही बता रहा है इसमें, ठीक है. द एक्टर्स कंस्ट्रक्ट मीनिंग्स, वो रिडक्शनिज्म में ये निगेट करता है इसमें, यू नो दे इग्नोर दिस थिंग्स. सो दैट इज़ वाई ब्लूमर इज़ अगेंस्ट ऑल फॉर्म्स ऑफ रिडक्शनिज्म. ठीक है. नाउ फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लेट मी गिव यू एन एग्जाम्पल जो इन योर किताब में भी दे रखा है, एटीट्यूड. ब्लूमर कहता है जो एटीट्यूड होता है, हमारा एटीट्यूड, मान लो किसी ने लाइक देयर आर टू फ्रेंड्स इन योर क्लासरूम एंड एज पर द रिडक्शनिस्ट, ह्यूमन बींग्स का जो एटीट्यूड होता है ना, दिस इज समथिंग इनहेरेंट, बिल्ट इन क्वालिटी की तरह समझता है. जो ब्लूमर कहते हैं कि नो, ये बिल्ट इन इनहेरेंट क्वालिटी, ये प्रिडिक्टेबल क्वालिटी नहीं है. लाइक इफ आई से समथिंग टू अ फ्रेंड, टू माई फ्रेंड, इट्स नॉट ऑलवेज प्रिडिक्टेबल दैट उनका एटीट्यूड ऐसा होता है, वो ऐसे रिस्पॉन्ड होगा, ऐसा नहीं है. ब्लूमर कहता है कि नो, इट्स नॉट स्टैटिक, वो नहीं है. तो ब्लूमर क्या कहता है, लेट्स सी एटीट्यूड में, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, व्हाइल कंसिडरिंग ह्यूमन एटीट्यूड एंड एसोसिएटेड एक्शंस, he is against reducing attitude as an already organized tendency. Already पहले से organize किए हुए, already something which is there inside me, already built entity नहीं है, already built attribute नहीं है. Like I have an attitude. कहते ना इसमें, there is one thing I remember in the movie 3 Idiots. Sir, मैं अपना attitude बहुत मुश्किल से ये I have constructed this attitude. Let me keep my attitude. You take your job. It's like बताता ना ऐसा. तो attitude एक एक process है. It's a process is involved in the formation of attitude. वो ऐसा नहीं है कि it's already there, preset है, वो नहीं है. ठीक है. तो already organized tendency नहीं है और an inherent internalized tendency नहीं है attitude, but considered as the defining process in which the actor comes to force his act. So when he forces his act towards the stimulus, उसी समय ना attitude form होता है. ठीक है. Something which may be right for, people may have different opinion, but this is what he says. In the process of the formation of an act, that's where attitude is developed. ठीक है. Now this means attitude is developed in the process of an act or a conduct, and the actions are not driven by attitude. You see, actions are not driven by attitude. पहला नहीं आता है. ठीक है. Action of A is not driven by attitude. मतलब पहले से attitude है, इनके पास पहले से attitude है, that is why उस attitude की वजह से उनका action ऐसा है. वो नहीं है. Actions are not driven by attitudes. But the reductionist would say, no, उनका एटीट्यूड ऐसा है इसलिए उनके एक्शन ऐसे. समझ गया ना. सो एक्शंस आर नॉट अ रिजिड टेंडेंसी जो प्रिडिक्टेबल पहले से फॉर्म किए हुए, इनहेरेंट प्रॉपर्टी नहीं है किसी का. ठीक है. सो दिस इज रिडक्शनिज्म वर्सेस सोशलिज्म. ठीक है. रिडक्शनिस्ट क्या सोचता है और सोशलिज्म में क्या सोचता है, उसका ये डिबेट है. अगेन दिस इज foundation of what? Philosophical foundation of SI, symbolic interactionism. Now let's come to Chicago School of Symbolic Interactionism versus, I'm just going through briefly. There are two schools which that we will discuss here, or we have, but then Chicago School of Symbolic Interactionism versus Iowa School of Symbolic Interactionism. Basic difference, you can go back and see what are the basic differences. Internet में भी मिलेगा. Chicago School relies on introspection and subjective interpretation, while Iowa School insists that quantitative empiricist methods are used in what? Studying the social experience. Okay. Iowa. I-O-W-A. Iowa, it's a state. Iowa University. ठीक है. एक स्टेट ऑफ USA, एक चिकागो स्कूल है, एक आयोवा स्कूल है. तो चिकागो स्कूल में it relies on introspection and subjective interpretation, while Iowa school insists on quantitative analysis and empirical methods. Now Chicago school का main proponent, as you all know, what we have been discussing throughout, ये चिकागो स्कूल का है, मीट है, ब्लूमर है, कूली है. एंड आयोवा स्कूल में देर इज कून, मैनफोर्ड कून, ठीक है. एंड देर इज अनदर फेमस thinker, what is that? Sheldon Stryker. Bimol sir will mention this name very frequently. Sheldon Stryker. Okay, let's not get into the details of what are the basic difference. मैंने बताया था ना, एक subjective interpretation, introspection में rely करता है to study the experience of the world, society, whereas क्वांटिटेटिव एनालिसिस एंड एम्पिरिसिस मेथड यूज़ करते हैं आयो स्कूल में. सो यस पॉसिबल है. यहाँ मैं एक चीज़ बताता हूँ, आयोवा स्कूल के बेसिक प्रिंसिपल. ओके, आयोवा स्कूल बिकम्स डिस्टिंक्टिव फॉर इट्स व्हाट emphasis on operationalizing symbolic interactionist concept in a standardized, something which is predictable, एक standardized format में. Symbolic interactionism में क्या होता है, बताया था ना कि अभी just a moment back, attitude which is not rigid, attitude पहले से pre-formed नहीं है, something inherent नहीं है. क्यों? इट्स ए मेंटल प्रोसेस, राइट. एक प्रिडिक्टेबल नहीं है. किसी का मेंटल प्रोसेस अलग हो सकता है, डिफरेंट सिचुएशंस में अलग अलग हो सकता है, राइट. सो इन द सेम वे आयोवा स्कूल में क्या होता है, उन लोगों का फाइंडिंग्स मोस्टली क्वांटिटेटिव क्या होता है. इफ़ यू हैव, आई विल टेल यू, क्वांटिटेटिव एनालिसिस व्हेन यू स्टडी पॉपुलेशन स्टडीज़ में क्या होता है, there's something called 1940 का, 1980 का, 40, 60, 80 पिरामिड फॉर्म होता है, पॉपुलेशन पिरामिड. एंड अल्टीमेटली क्या होता है, like this pyramids. And ultimately you will 3 years का ट्रेंड, उसके बाद 2025 में क्या हो सकता है, like that is known as projection. प्रिडिक्शन इन प्रोजेक्शन, पॉपुलेशन में प्रोजेक्शन कहता है, ठीक है. तो ये एक सिस्टमैटिक है, समथिंग सिस्टमैटिक, समथिंग विच कैन बी डन इन क्वांटिटेटिव एनालिसिस में, नॉट इन सब्जेक्टिव इंटरप्रिटेशन, ठीक है. तो ये आयोवा स्कूल में द फाइंडिंग्स, देयर स्टडी इज बेसिकली रिलेटेड टू एम्पिरिसिस मेथड. एंड एम्पिरिसिस मेथड में क्या होता है, बेसिकली एम्पिरिसिस में मोस्टली क्वांटिटेटिव एनालिसिस होता है. Let's not get into the details, okay, very vast. So just keep in mind their mode of interaction, their mode of doing analysis or methodology of studying is based on empiricist method and mostly quantitative, and the findings are mostly standardized. Okay, something which is not in Chicago school. Okay, I think things are clear till now, right? So the last part, I mean the basic part आ गया अभी.
How come interaction between two persons will be getting objectified and quantified?
Objectified and quantified. That is where the basic difference lies. Okay, so Iowa school, I'm telling you, let's not get into the details. बहुत लंबा फिर कहानी एक तरफ चला जाएगा, ठीक है. Let's come to meat, the main process. I mean study. Okay, so something basic I can tell about Kuhn ने क्या कहा था in Iowa school. So according to Kuhn, social behavior can be studied both in what, not just out there in the world, but also in the laboratory. So when you say laboratory, quantitative analysis will come, right? Something, laboratory setup में क्या होता है, things are all mechanized and things like that, right? So that's why he said, Kuhn said, It's not just outside in the world, but also you can do in laboratory. ठीक है, human beings. So he said the ultimate goal was to be able to put forth a generalizable human behavior. Human behavior का एक generalizable character बताने के लिए quantitative analysis, something that can be quantified, a generalized method of saying, putting forward human behavior in a very predictable manner. That is what Iowa school will speak about, Mr. Kuhn will speak about, okay, in this. But जो चिकागो स्कूल में नहीं होता है. ब्लूमर का चिकागो स्कूल में क्या होता है? They relied heavily on participant observation method, and Chicago school was more anthropological in nature, and to understand the meaning of the system of an individual or a group of people, they rely on anthropological method, and they did not give more emphasis on uncovering the generalizable patterns of human behavior. The generalizable patterns है ना, उसमें ज़्यादा नहीं, rather they would give preference to the subjective interpretation. Okay, now let's see symbolic interactionism में क्या होता है. Two basic diagrams are there. ये मैंने अपना खुद बनाया है, not from any book, but this is from a book. Okay, subject-object relationship and the stimulus response relationship in an environment. वही है, ये देखो symbolic interaction. Symbols, यहाँ क्या होगा? Establish meaning. Meaning इससे क्या होगा? Develop views. इसमें देखो try to ये cognition वाला part, subjective interpretation, वो part हमेशा सोचो कि where is that fitting in this diagram? कहाँ आ रहा है? एक self का एक subjective part in any environment, communication between subject and object, or in a setting subject और object का relationship में एक होता है ना, subject का, object is out there, me, I'm an individual, I'm the subject, right? Subject subjective interpretation, something, if anybody is just thrown out there in the world, बहुत सारे स्टिमुलस आएगा, साउंड्स, वेव्स, लाइट, जेस्चर्स, बहुत सारी चीज़ें, दोज आर स्टिमुलस. ओके, एनीवेयर, इफ यू आर सिटिंग इन द क्लास, फैन से हवा आ रहा है, वहाँ से लाइट आ रहा है, आई एम स्पीकिंग, साउंड आ रहा है, वॉइस आ रहा है, दीज आर ऑल स्टिमुलस. उसमें जो रिस्पॉन्स है वही है, वही से डिवेलप होता है. सो व्हेन यू आर रिस्पॉन्डिंग समथिंग टू द स्टिमुलस, दैट्स वेयर माई subjective interpretation, my something that goes in my cognition, okay, before interpreting what goes inside my mind, before my act of action, action होता है ना, उससे पहले क्या होता है, वो सब इसमें डिस्कशन होगा. तो ये देखो एक सिम्बल्स होगा, सिम्बल्स क्या होता है, विल कम टू दैट. ओके, ये सिम्बल ऐसा नहीं है, सिम्बल वो नहीं है, ठीक है. अभी बस सिम्बल्स होगा, एस्टैब्लिश मीनिंग, develop views, and then you see communicate each other, with each other. Society. So this is a complex. Again, coming back to sociology. Sociology में क्या होता है? A web of interrelationship with different nodes, between different nodes. ये बताता है ना. Sociology is all about studying the web of relationship between different nodes in the society. Same thing symbolic interaction में देखो. There are different symbols. बहुत सारे symbols है. Symbols क्या है? I'll come to that. Okay. बहुत सारे symbols है. Symbols को देखो, symbol से क्या आया? Stimulus. Okay, it will be absorbed, then you make meanings, you establish meaning through cognition and all those processes. Okay, then you develop views. मेरा अपना views क्या है? Then you communicate with others, with each other. द होल सेंस ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन, मीनिंग कैसे बनाता है, राइट? सिंबल्स, you conceive that, you perceive or conceive whatever, you receive that symbol, you make meanings, then you communicate with others, and then it will go to the society, whole process. So this is the web, okay, this is the process, this is what symbolic interactionism does. The same thing मैंने क्या बताया, मैंने एक बनाया very simplified form which may help you, I'll tell you, okay, which may might help you, I don't know, लेकिन ये मेरा डायग्राम है after reading some books. Okay, so I have made it this way. Subject, या क्या होता है? Establish meaning. Object. Subject object dynamism में क्या चलता है मैं बताता हूँ. This is the subject, individual. This is the object out there in the society. So object से क्या होगा, क्या आता है object से? Stimulus. और subject से क्या? Response. समझ गया ना? And in this complex, the subject will form established meaning. Very simple, है ना? तो in this process यहाँ पे चलता है हर चीज़, इनके दिमाग में चलता है. Goes on inside the mind of the subject. Understood? So ये stimulus हो गया, ये ठीक है. Now Bloomer was against sociologist theories, especially structure functionalism. मैंने बताया था ना, two important things which were hampering or acting as a problem to symbolic interactionism. क्या क्या था? एक structure functionalism, दूसरा क्या है? Psychological reductionism. So the reductionism of any kind, he was not for any kind of psychological reductionism. The second thing is he said structure functionalism. Why? Because structure functionalism views individual behavior as being shaped or determined by large scale external forces. जो पहले भी बताया, large scale external forces. Factors such as what? Society में देखो, structure functionalism में my dispensation in the world is shaped by what? इनका नॉर्म, सोसाइटी का, कास्ट का, नॉर्म्स, ये वो बहुत सारे हैं ना. Coercive elements or maybe something which is forced upon me by different things in the environment. ठीक है? So I am structured by different things in the environment, different entities in the environment, different norms, a set of rules, this and that thing. In a state you see how एक actor का और एक subject का, you just see where someone is suspended in the state. एक तरफ रूल है, एक तरफ ये लॉ है, ये है, वो बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं ना. सेम वे सोसाइटी में वही है. ठीक है? तो ब्लूमर का कहना है कि he was against the sociologist theories, especially structure functionalism, because he says that this is basically, they're talking about external factors. Individual agency ज़्यादा नहीं बताता है, एक्सटर्नल फोर्सेस के बारे में ज़्यादा बता रहे हैं. That's where all theories are not absolutely I mean अपना theories है. ठीक है? Just keep it that way. ठीक है? Your thinking must be up to that level. I mean it is where very good he is asking this. This is where this the idea of debate between theories springs. है ना? So he is saying that this is not absolute. Right, perfectly right. That's where the idea of debate between different theories springs. It comes out. Okay. Now let's come to the next part. The social experience. Social experience. थोड़ा सा lengthy है class. You are getting tired, or is it very boring? Boring हो रहा है? लिटिल बिट लग रहा है, बिकॉज मैंने बताया था ना बहुत सारे टर्म्स है, मैकेनिकल है, दैट्स वाई लेट्स मेक इट लिटिल लाइवली हियर, आई विल गो स्विफ्टली, बट बिफोर दैट लेट मी कम सोशल एक्सपीरियंस. सो मीड गेव प्रायोरिटी टू द सोशल वर्ल्ड, बताया था ना, अब सिम्बॉलिक इंटरेक्शनिज्म में आ गया. ठीक है, ही गेव प्रायोरिटी टू द सोशल वर्ल्ड in understanding the experience of the world, experience of the environment. He will give preference to the society first, social world first, not the other way around. Okay, individual पहला उसके बाद society आता है, वो नहीं, society पहला उसके बाद individual. ठीक है, individual पहला किस में आता है? Psychology में. ठीक है, that is looking at the behaviors of the individuals that constitute the social group. वो नहीं है. Looking at the behavior of the individual that constitute the social group. The individual's behavior is shaped by, because it is shaped in such a way because of the existence of society. That is what Mead or Bloomer will say. Okay, Mead's contribution was really to the development of self and especially the development of childhood. उनका ज़्यादा contribution है. We'll talk about it. Okay, so elements of Mead's theory. Let's come to elements of Mead's theory. There are, I have noted down 8 points. ठीक है, the first one is act. What is an act? 8 points है, ठीक है, I'm going to talk about 8 points. The first one is the act. Literal meaning of act. He considers an act to be the most primitive unit of his theory. Okay, the most primitive unit of his theory, and here he uses behaviorist approach, जो पहले बताया था उसमें behaviorist approach, and focus on the stimulus and response. Act, someone's act, उसमें stimulus और response का जो dynamism है उसमें focus करते हैं. He however said stimulus does not bring out an automatic something, unthinking response to some stimulus. वो ऐसा नहीं होता है, एक stimulus आया तो I'll just respond it like the unthinking process. वो नहीं होता है, मीड कहता है. ठीक है, फ्रॉम ए ह्यूमन एक्टर. मीड सेड इन कोट, ओके, वी कंसीव of the stimulus as an occasion and opportunity to act. We conceive what goes on inside this remark. You must think. We conceive of the stimulus as an opportunity or an occasion to act. इसका मतलब क्या है? Can someone tell me? As an opportunity or an occasion to act. Meaning समझा इसमें? इसका मतलब there is an element of interpretation, subjective interpretation. ऐसा नहीं कि एक stimulus आए, you just throw your action. वो नहीं है. It is an opportunity to act. मतलब something goes on inside your mind which will help you to interpret the stimulus and then act. ठीक है, समझ गया ना? Now इसमें देखो ये मीड ने बताया था, मैं कोटेशन है. सो देर आर 4 डिफरेंट स्टेजेस ऑफ एक्ट. एक्ट का 4 डिफरेंट स्टेज. स्टिमुलस है, एक रिस्पॉन्स है. इन रिस्पॉन्डिंग टू स्टिमुलस देयर इज एन एक्ट. बट देन इस एक्ट का भी बहुत सारे स्टेजेस है, 4 डिफरेंट स्टेजेस. द फर्स्ट वन इज इम्पल्स. इम्पल्स, ये एक्ट है, एक्ट का इम्पल्स. 4 different stages. Perception, and the third one is manipulation. So very interesting. This is very interesting. Okay. The fourth one is consummation. Consummation मतलब the end. Okay. So impulse, एक impulse देखो. How do you